The Prime Minister has spelled out one of the key features of next month's budget. In a speech last night to the Sydney Institute, Gillard confirmed the budget will include measures to shift people off welfare and into work. She says every Australian, even those who are hard cases, should be pulling his or her own weight. Everyone who can work should work. Lifting participation in the workforce will entrench a new culture of work and opportunity, while also easing some of the pressures being felt by what she describes as the patchwork economy. Tony Abbott has called the speech a series of motherhood cliches. Prime Minister Gillard is in our breakfast studio. Prime Minister, welcome to breakfast.
Good morning, Fran.
You said in your speech that the argument for getting people into work is overwhelming, even those people, quote, whose lives present hard cases. Who are you referring to there? Who are the hard cases?
I'm referring to people who may have left school early, not even have basic reading and writing skills, whose life has taken them outside the economic mainstream and for whom it can be a long way back. But we want to make sure that that young kid in Kwinana who desperately wants an apprenticeship gets one. We want to make sure that a young single mum in Sydney's West, maybe she left school too early, maybe she's struggling now, still gets the skills that she needs and an opportunity for work. There may be further hard cases we can talk about. I talked in the speech last night about people with disabilities, maybe older workers who are no longer capable of doing manual work, but that doesn't mean that they don't want to work at all.
Opportunities don't come cheap. We know that. Welfare to work reforms cost money. They don't save money. Considering the pressures on the budget, how much money will there be to pay for the carrots and enforce the sticks to get people back into work?
You're right, we've got to match opportunity and responsibility. So I'm saying people who can work should work and they have a responsibility to be in work. We've got a responsibility too to provide them with the opportunities that get them into work, and that does come with costs. But
so there'll be new money in the budget for that sort of thing, for the training and the apprenticeships?
Fran, what I can absolutely guarantee is when we put measures forward in the budget, they'll add up and they'll be properly costed, and that's something very different from Mr Abbott's approach. And Fran, I think we've also got to take the long view here. Yes, there are costs associated with giving people the opportunity they need to get into work, but then for them, there is a lifetime of earnings, and for the government, there's a lifetime of tax paying instead of welfare payments. So that's a great goal for the country and a great outcome for those individuals.
No argument about that, I don't think, from anybody. Let's talk about Mr Abbott's approach, because last night when you talk about the patchwork economy, you talked about a number of areas in the country that need workers. We know WA mining industry needs 30,000 new workers over the next 2 years, extra workers. What about Tony Abbott's plan of paying unemployed people to move to high-need areas to work for a minimum amount of time? Do you like that idea?
Well, we've already instituted a labour mobility scheme. We did that in the context of the flood reconstruction, where we are facilitating people who have been unemployed going to areas that desperately need workers for flood reconstruction. So that's an important labour mobility trial. It's proved difficult in the past to get people to move around the country for work, but I do believe we need to get people thinking about going to where work is, and that's why we've already instituted that program.
Obviously, if the mining industry in WA says it needs 30,000 workers within 2 years, we're not going to train that many in that time, even though we might start the job. Can we expect a pretty significant boost in the immigration intake alongside these welfare measures to get those workers that are needed?
Well, before we make a conclusion about servicing the mining industry, I think we've got to understand some of the interesting and different patterns of work in our mining industry today. Last night I talked about being at Barrow Island for the Gorgon project and meeting a bloke who lives 2 streets away from my home in Altona. He flies in and flies out to Barrow Island in the northwest of this country from Melbourne's west. Now, I don't think many Australians have actually got their head around those sorts of new work patterns and the opportunities that they give us to give people who live in areas of historic disadvantage access to an opportunity. And the mining industry is not only hungry for skilled labour, yes, they are hungry for that, but they're also hungry for manual labour for people doing entry-level jobs. Fran, I understand we're going to need skilled migration as well to get people into the mining industry, and we've restructured the short-term skilled migration program, to get the rorts out of it and to make sure that it's more responsive to employers' needs. But it's not satisfactory to me for the mining industry in this country to say we need skilled workers and for our national answer to be let's import them, while we know that there are kids in Kwinana that can't get a job and can't get a chance. So my speech last night was about saying, let's look at the face of that kid in Kwinana, that Australian face, an Australian who wants work and an opportunity, and let's direct our attention to that. Now, of course, we will still need skilled migration, but that can't become an excuse for ignoring the needs of that young man in Kwinana or the woman here in Western Sydney or someone who lives in suburban Brisbane who doesn't have a chance and doesn't have a job.
Okay, let's talk about the carbon tax now, because yesterday your Climate Change Minister was promising compensation. According to independent MP Tony Windsor, who we spoke to earlier this morning on Breakfast, there may not even be a carbon tax, which I think might be news to you. Let's have a listen to what Tony Windsor told us earlier this morning.
There is no carbon tax. There may not be a carbon tax.
Well, that's the Prime Minister's promise. That'd be news to the government, wouldn't it?
So the Prime Minister doesn't have the numbers, as I understand it, at the moment. So I think when things get into the Parliament, people have a vote. I have a vote. Others do as well. So you can never guarantee something until it gets through a minority government or a minority Parliament.
Tony Windsor is a member of your Climate Change Committee. Does that alarm you? Does it sound like a threat to you?
Oh no, that sounds perfectly consistent with everything Tony Windsor's ever said about pricing carbon.
Sounds like he still needs convincing.
No, he said consistently, Fran, and I very much respect this, that he would wait to the end and judge the full package. What Tony Windsor has said to me and said publicly is that he does believe climate change is real and that we need to tackle it. He does believe that pricing carbon is the best way, an important way of tackling climate change, but for an individual legislative package, he's going to look at the package and wait to the end and then judge. He's sat at the Multi-Party Climate Change Committee and said that. He said it publicly, he said it to me, and he's reaffirmed it to you this morning.
Is that one of the reasons why we're not getting the detail of this package? Is a hold-up because there's an argument about these details in the Multi-Party Committee? I mean, why can't you tell us what the price of a tonne of carbon or the price on carbon will be?
No, that's not the explanation, Fran. The explanation is that we are in an intensive consultative process through our business roundtable, through our roundtable with not-for-profit organisations, environmental groups, trade unions, to get the design of the carbon pricing right. We've obviously announced the mechanism, and yesterday we confirmed that millions of Australian households will be better off with a price on carbon. So that's a design principle that more than 50% of the revenue will go to assisting households. But we are continuing to consult on the details, and we will use what we learn from those consultations to get the package right, as well as, of course, the discussions through the Multi-Party Climate Change Committee on which Mr Windsor sits.
But that design principle, we knew. You've been telling us for ages that households will be compensated. Householders still don't know how much their cost of living is going to go up thanks to the carbon tax and how much money they will get to offset that. When will you be able to explain it to them? Because obviously they're worried about this and they're inclined to side with Tony Abbott, who's saying, be careful, don't vote for something you don't know.
Well, we'll stick to the timetable we outlined and get it right. And the timetable we outlined was that we would announce the details of the carbon price package in the middle of this year, to legislate it in the second 6 months of this year in the House of Representatives and into the Senate. So we'll stick with that timetable, Fran. Now, I understand Tony Abbott's out there, negative, stop this, end that, cut the other, don't do anything, be afraid of the future, everybody should be scared. That's what Tony Abbott does about everything. It's what he's doing about carbon pricing. What he's not telling people is that his proposed solution would cost households $720 a year, whereas what I'm saying to Australian households is we'll get this right. We'll put a price on the biggest 1,000 polluters in this country. They will pay the price on carbon, and we will use the revenue to assist households, protect jobs and to tackle climate change. And what I confirmed yesterday, and the Minister, Greg Combet, confirmed, is that more than 50% of the revenue raised will go to assisting households, and millions of households will be better off.
Whatever you think about what Tony Abbott's doing, one argument he makes, I think, is a powerful one. which is the need for a mandate. I mean, why don't you take this to an election? You've got an argument against Tony Abbott's plan, so there is an argument that you're making against why his plan doesn't work. Why don't you take it to the people and get that mandate?
Well, we've been talking about pricing carbon in this country for the best part of 20 years.
That's true, but before the last election you said no carbon tax.
Well, let's explain that directly then, Fran, and let's not in any way mislead people about what happened at the last election. John Howard went to the 2007 election saying this country should have an emissions trading scheme. Kevin Rudd went to the 2007 election saying there should be an emissions trading scheme. I went to the 2010 election saying I wanted to see a price on carbon, and I believed...
Later.
I wanted to see a price on carbon, and the best way of doing that was an emissions trading scheme. And yes, in the context of that, choosing between a carbon tax and an emissions trading scheme, I said the emissions trading scheme's the better way, and that's why I said there wouldn't be a carbon tax. In this Parliament, we're working to get a package through. It will have a fixed price mechanism at the start, effectively like a tax, and then we will get to the emissions trading scheme I talked about in 2010, Kevin Rudd talked about in 2007, and John Howard talked about in 2007, campaigning alongside Tony Abbott. So let's just be clear about what's happened in past elections. Let's be clear about Mr Abbott's chopping and changing. Campaigned alongside John Howard in 2007 for an emissions trading scheme. Well, that's where we're going to get to.
It's hard to avoid the obvious as you list those names that the proposed carbon trading scheme has knocked off a few leaders. John Howard lost in part because of it. Kevin Rudd lost his leadership in part because of it. A number of opposition leaders have lost their jobs over it. Do you fear losing an election fought on a carbon tax if you went to one?
No, it's about getting on with the job. We in 2010, as Prime Minister, as leader of the Labor Party, I said to this nation, climate change is real. We need to tackle it. The best way of doing that is to price carbon, and the best way of pricing carbon is through an emissions trading scheme. Here I sit now as Prime Minister, working hard, working consistently, working methodically to get us to that emissions trading scheme.
Last night you talked about the importance of the long view, working for the long term, not being distracted in the short term. But short-term pressures are there simply in the design of this government. It's a minority government. You could be forced to an election earlier than you think if your numbers don't hold. Do you concede the pokies deal with Andrew Wilkie is setting up another backlash in many Australian communities, it seems, who some of them already not on board with a carbon tax?
But it's the right thing to do. Fran, there's an old adage that if you can't afford to lose the amount you're going to bet, you can't afford the bet. And what Andrew Wilkie is advocating, what's come out of the Productivity Commission work that the government asked for in the last period of government, so we've been talking about poker machine reform for a long period of time, what's come out of all of that work is a system where you think hard about how much you can afford to lose and you set your own limit. Now, you go and have a bet. People enjoy playing the pokies. People enjoy having a bet. It's an Australian pastime. The only thing that a mandatory pre-commitment scheme would require people to do is think in advance, how much can I afford to lose before it cuts into buying things for the kids, before it means I can't meet next week's rent payment or this month's mortgage payment. So that's the system.
You're absolutely committed to this pre-commitment technology. We had Tony Windsor on saying he doesn't think it'll work. He thinks it's a bad idea. He doesn't think he can vote for it.
We're committed to a mandatory pre-commitment scheme. We're committed to getting the design of it right. There is work happening at a variety of levels to get the design of it right. There's been a parliamentary committee involved in this process, and of course Mr Wilkie is playing a very big role in that parliamentary committee. The responsible minister, Jenny Macklin, is engaged in direct consultations and work with Australian states. People will assess the package when the package is in front of them. But what you're putting to me, Fran, is what's my view and what's the government's view about poker machine reform. Well, I don't think it's an Australian value or an Australian way to see profiting off other people's misery. I don't think people want to see their neighbours in trouble because they've put too much money down poker machines. People want to be able to have recreational bets. They want to be able to have a flutter and enjoy those things. But I think Australians will be open to a system that manages people's wanting to have a bit of fun with a system that helps people not get into trouble.
Prime Minister, just before we go, you say you're sticking to the promise of getting the budget into surplus by 2012-13, which you acknowledge was a political promise, not an economic one, but based on the notion it's time for the government to step back so the private sector and the government aren't chasing, quote, the same scarce resources and driving up prices and adding to inflationary pressures. There's no inflationary pressures, though, in funding medical research, is there? I mean, that's the job of government.
Well, Fran, you're referring, of course, to the various protests and raising of issues that there's been over the last few days. On that, I'm going to disappoint you and give the traditional answer. I'm not going to speculate on what is in the budget. I understand that people, particularly our research community, is concerned about funding for research, but I'm not going to preempt anything that's in the budget. To do that and to engage in the rule-in, rule-out games means every day between now and the budget I would face questioning about what's in the budget. What we do when we prepare a budget is we work hard, we look at everything from every angle, we make the best decisions, and then we announce them. And so people will have to wait to budget night on that question.
And you're sticking to your commitment that the second-term Gillard government, a priority will be mental health?
Of course, we've been working hard on mental health and it is a priority, and I believe our Minister, Mark Butler, is doing some good work with mental health advocates. Fran, if I can just go back and say on the question of surplus, I do want to be clear about that, and I believe I was clear in the speech last night. I made a commitment to get the budget to surplus in 2012-13. I gave that commitment to the Australian people and I will honour that commitment. But
commitments can change. You also gave a commitment there'd be no carbon tax.
But I gave that commitment because it's the right thing to do by the economy. When the economy is growing strongly, it's the right thing to do to have government step back so we are not adding to inflationary pressures. So this is the right economic strategy and that's why we will deliver it. On the carbon tax question, Fran, I've explained that. I wanted to see an emissions trading scheme. I believe that was the preferable mechanism to an ongoing carbon tax. What will we end up with out of this Parliament? Well, I am determined that we will end up with an emissions trading scheme following a fixed price period of pricing carbon. Now, it's not about the mechanism, it's about the outcome. I'm happy to explain the mechanism and the mechanism's important, but what's the outcome here? The outcome here, pricing carbon pollution, the biggest polluters paying, and what that means is they will innovate and cut the amount of pollution they generate.
And just finally, Prime Minister, you're meeting with the New South Wales Premier Barry O'Farrell this morning. He will try to convince you of the need to fund Sydney's North West Rail line. The new Premier does have a mandate to use that money where he likes, doesn't he?
No Premier in this country has a mandate to use federal government money, Fran.
The voters elected him on that promise. Do you acknowledge that?
And I think you'll find some of Barry O'Farrell's local members in Parramatta and Epping campaigned in favour of the Parramatta to Epping rail line. So let's just be a little bit careful about claims here. Let's have the discussion. I'm looking forward to meeting with Premier O'Farrell. I've congratulated him on his victory in New South Wales, and I'm looking forward to working with him in the interests of people in this state. There are a number of very important things that need to be done for Sydney and New South Wales, and I'm very open to having a discussion with Premier O'Farrell, but the federal government will decide where federal government resources go.
Prime Minister, thanks for joining us in the studio.
Thank you.
Prime Minister Julia Gillard in the Breakfast Studio. And we do continue to request an interview with Tony Abbott, but the opposition leader is too busy to talk to you at the moment. It's 5 minutes to 8.